Good. Hey, my last question today, and it's an important one as well. A lot of these are very pastoral questions today, is how do I set healthy limits and boundaries with my family? And let me begin by saying this. Everybody needs to set boundaries with their family. That's not a weird thing. I know a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. I know somebody who once, it's like they got married and their in-laws felt like boundaries. What are those? And boundaries are good. There's a book called Boundaries, about 25 years old now. Recommend it to you. Really great book. And all of us need boundaries. The Bible says, like in marriage, let a man and his wife leave their parents, let them cleave one to another. And there is a leaving and a cleaving. And you cannot do cleaving if you've never done leaving. And there are, I think, a challenge with a lot of family relationships. Let's talk about a couple who get married and they want to honor their parents. They want to stay in relationship, children, grandchildren, different things like that. They want them to have that ongoing part of their life. And yet they don't know, it's really easy to cut off a relationship. That's simple. But they know they shouldn't do that. They don't want to do that. And it's where those boundaries should be set. And, again, every scenario is different. If I were talking to a young couple, I would say talk amongst yourselves, firstly as a couple, and you define healthy boundaries. As a basic rule, I would say this. Children, like my children, I have an 11-year-old in my home. My children need to obey me. They need to honor me, but they also need to obey me. Yeah. Now, when my 11-year-old, imagine at 25, he goes off and gets married, he still needs to honor me. He doesn't need to obey me. He needs to work those things out within his marriage. And, I think the most basic rule, the most basic boundary I could talk about is a place like as an adult child, you don't have to obey your parents. And I think the danger often comes when parents are trying to give advice to adult children and when that advice isn't wanted. And I think what we've got to do if we want to do relationships well is do communication well. And I would say to somebody, if you're in that scenario where maybe a family member is trying to give unsolicited, undesired advice, I would actually say don't respond in the moment. Don't argue, don't create a big scene over that. Rather, when you're in a moment with this peace and everything's great, get with them. And just actually come to an agreement that says, hey, I love you, great. Occasionally, I will come to you and ask your advice. But if I don't ask for advice, please don't give it. And then I would say to them in a future optic, not a past one, I would say to them, hey, if we're ever in that circumstance, I'll just remind you of this conversation because I want us to have a good relationship. And I don't want to feel uneasy being around you. And you see, if somebody will agree in principle, I mean, frankly, most people who want to push advice and dictate and tell others, they don't want somebody doing that with them. And they will agree with that set of rules concerning themselves. So I would try to say set healthy boundaries rather than having a big bust up and an argument and fireworks when it's happening. Do that in a future optic. I would set boundaries about how much time people spent together. I've known couples who the in-laws are knocking on their door every minute. I think we need to set boundaries at times over our, over finances, over time, over space, over many different things. My basic advice would be this: make those boundaries clear. If I have a boundary that to me is clear and then it's not clear to you and you keep crossing that boundary, that's really difficult, and I can't blame you or rebuke you or reproach you in any way that you haven't respected a boundary that you didn't even know was there. So I would say, again, in a peaceful, proactive way, let's set those boundaries. Depending on the context and the relationship, sometimes it can be good to actually write them down. Because at times people will have a conversation and everybody will go, yeah, we're on board. We're on the same page. And then later it's like people can forget what they don't wish to remember. Sometimes I'll be with somebody and I'll say, hey, I'm going to write this down just for my sake, because I might forget it. But I'm really actually writing it down so that we can come back to the future and say, people have different memories, but paper and pen doesn't lie, and set those things down. Good boundaries, good fences make good neighbors. And knowing what's our responsibility, what are others' responsibility, where's the place of mutuality where we can agree and exchange things, actually creates really healthy relationships. So I would encourage you, set up good boundaries. I would encourage you, again, in a kind of marriage context, if you're in a situation where your spouse's family are encroaching on boundaries, I think a couple have to respect each other primarily. Again, the cleaving is that most important thing. So I would say set good, healthy boundaries and then enforce them in love. And there is a place where if somebody doesn't respect boundaries, you have to put consequences in and say, hey, if I were to loan you, let's say, a power tool, and I say, hey, that's great, you can use it, but I really would like it back by Saturday. If I loan you things and it never comes back, I'd put a boundary in there and say, hey, I don't feel I can loan you things again because you don't keep your word in that context. And that's not a mean or cruel thing to do. So have good, healthy boundaries. Yes and amen. I hope that's helped, guys. I'll be doing another Q&A next week. So if you want to file me up some questions, be very happy to try to answer those. Hey, again, if you're on YouTube, why not hit the subscribe button down there? Check out the links below, and I'll see you soon in the plan of God. Bye for now.